Small disclaimer, this whole thing is basically just one big opinion piece, so yeah, try not to read too much into what I'm saying, but yeah, fuck it. This is just my thoughts on a particular subject, and if the debate about the Second Amendment is something that gives you hives, I would recommend giving this video a skip. The funny thing about the firearm debate for me is it's so heated, it almost gives you an inkling of how bad the slave debate was leading up to the little spat between North and South in the 1800s. And in all honesty, I kind of find the issue fairly simple, at least to a certain degree, mostly because I believe, as the title would suggest, that an armed society is a polite society. And this will probably be a gross oversimplification on my thoughts on the matter, but I don't think there should be any infringement on the right to bear arms, as the Constitution provided us this. And this heretical persecution of those who cherish the privilege to own a firearm, from my perspective, are a special brand of evil busybodies, as they align with the most ghoulish and malevolent of mischiefs of factionalism, using the most abhorrent the most abhorrent of events to justify themselves and their condemnation of one's own right to self-defense. This is not to say one cannot oppose the idea of the right, but they can, but if they wish to surrender their own rights to the government, this is their prerogative. However, that does not mean they have a right to demand that their fellow citizens should have the same done to them by force. Like, you can't just have the government come in and take someone's gun away just because you don't like the idea of someone else being able to own a gun. Like, just because it makes you uncomfortable, you have no right to do that. There are contexts where the right to a gun can be a benefit. For example, I point to the incident in Waco and the immigration crisis in France. In the land of frog legs and excellent comics, where you are not permitted to have firearms, to my knowledge, there have been more than a few instances of issues brought by the migrants, not just in France, actually. Like, you had certain events like the Struggle Snuggle event on New Year's Day in Cologne and a bunch of other places. Or that is to say, some of the aforementioned migrants who have proven to be more of an issue attacked and again struggle snuggled, for example, and because of France's lack of freedoms which are enjoyed by us Americans, they are forced to endure these attacks while their leaders continue to do nothing and permit more of these legions of outlanders to flood into the country and make the country more hostile and unsafe for its native inhabitants, as well as insulting, depending on your perspective, the legitimately decent beings among the migrants who came to their country. Like, the ones who went through the proper channels, they actually had to go through some shit to become citizens and get into the country, and I find what they're doing, and I don't know, if I was an immigrant and I saw people just being let in after I went through so much hell to get into a country, I would be annoyed. But that's my stance. And these migrants are willing to use anything, possibly even a spoon, in the cause of harming the local color and and these frogs are unable to defend themselves. As for Waco, while the information of the circumstances surrounding and leading up to the horrible and avoidable event are dubious, at best, the end result does offer the best retort to why one should not trust the government. People could always say the feds and the government could always decide to do that to anyone else on a whim. If not for these reasons, then there are the numerous school shootings we have experienced to consider, which is often used as the oldest trick in the book of anti-gun activists as reasons for repealing the rights to gun ownership, as these schools were often not fortified to counter such incidents and were thus more vulnerable than the Alamo. When I was in school, there were always an officer or two on campus to help protect me and my fellow students, I presume, in the event of a shooter. Like, I remember seeing some of these officers on campus. They were usually nice guys, and I'm glad they were there. And they were there in case a shooter did come to pay our school a visit. I find this therefore more logical to upgrade. I find it more logical to just upgrade security, like beef it up. Like, I'd rather do that than take away everyone's right to own a gun. Like, that seems more logical. And yeah, like, this could, instead of it being a detriment, just do that. And spare me this argument that the good guy with a gun is a fallacy, because I prefer to at least have the option available to me. If anything, if shit went south, I would at least like to have the option to protect myself, but that's just me. In addition to this, the right to bear arms has been more than a good deterrent of foreign bodies from fucking with us. For instance of this, look to the days of the Texas founders fighting against Mexico in World War II. In both examples, the Mexican and Japanese were concerned that if they did invade the territories, that they would have themselves contending with a difficult predicament, as the armed population would present a great resistance to the invasion. Even if they did come in great force, the issue would be that the population could fight back with formidable and somewhat capable opposition and make the situation more difficult for the invaders and for what they would have initially expected. It'd be more probably than they could anticipate, and it would probably be more than they could prepare for. So it's not just a means for citizens to protect themselves, but also an effective means to deter foreign nations from invading our homeland. Assuming, of course, they don't decide to nuke us. So I'd rather see a return to the days of the Wild West, at least in terms of the norms of the day, where everyone was armed and dealt with problems themselves rather than relying on government to solve matters for them. A government which seems to be just a Jonesin, to be more akin to a species of government we see in 1984. And in consideration to the point of firearms being a deterrent, I invoke a quote to show that this has something which has been recognized in the past generations. As it was once noted by Theodore Roosevelt, the practice of carrying dangerous weapons makes cowboys show more courtesy to each other and far less rudeness to strangers than in the case of other sorts of people. When a quarrel may well result fatally, a man thinks twice about going into it. Warlike people or classes always treat one another with a certain amount of consideration and politeness. This observation is something which seems to have been lost on the current generation, either on the part of unintentional ignorance or willful intellectual dishonesty. Bearing this in mind, it is from my perspective for the reasons I find those who oppose the right to bear arms extremely asinine in their malevolence, as they would prefer to willingly ignore these factors and reasons to respect the right of the First Amendment or Second Amendment. I get those two confused sometimes. Sorry about that. For the sake of security. To this, I quote and paraphrase Benjamin Franklin. Those who willfully trade freedom for security deserve neither. Some malcontents argue that the First or Second should be released on the grounds of the Founding Fathers did not foresee the innovation in firearms down to the line after they departed to meet their Creator. To this, I would counter that they should either consult the Federalist Papers or look at firearms at the time, because it wasn't like they didn't have firearms that fired more than one shot. They were still lead balls, but there were multi-barreled guns back in the day when muskets were still a thing. This comes from the same side who would have all of us, except for the guards of their elites, disarmed and at the mercy of both them and the criminals, such as the cartels, as well as violent activists such as BLM and Antifa. Those who are willing to permit carte blanche to do as they please unto both me and my ilk, be it physical harm or even death, and do not even entertain the idea of considering the consequences of their blind idealism, and for them it will not matter. They will disregard the result of their blind moronicism. For these reasons, I do not take these pissheads who call for the abolishment of the amendments for convenience much seriously, or show them much recognition intellectually. Those who willingly advocate for revocation of our rights should be looked upon suspiciously, in my opinion. I don't regard them as traitors, I just regard them as fools, at best. And that's more or less my take on this whole debate of should we have guns or not. It's just, I'm not saying you don't have a right to have an opinion on the matter. You do. You have every right to, be against it. You do have a right to that, but I have a right to defend it, and I was given that right by the Constitution. Now, while it does say militia, it also says the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. So I guess it's a matter of interpretation of the Constitution. Like when I read it, I look at it as basically saying, look, a militia is important, so therefore it is for this reason that I believe a right to bear arms should be uninfringible. That's how I look at it. And that's based on how it was written, based on what I've read online. And if this gets me in any trouble or causes me to lose subscribers, I am sorry, but I just wanted to say something about this. I've seen this argument brought up in the past, just thought I would give my 2 cents on it. Actually, I'm not sorry. We've seen countries where they've disarmed people, and we've seen what happens as a result. Like, in South Africa, if you are fucked if you're white. You are fucked. And I don't mean that
metaphorical way. I mean, you are sometimes also literally having that done to you against your will, especially if you're a fucking kid or a woman. And you don't have the right to bear arms as far as I can tell. I mean, a lot of countries do not provide this right to you. They also don't give you the right of free speech, technically. Like, you don't have this in Britain or Canada, as far as I can tell. Again, this is all opinion-based, but... So we are fortunate to have these rights. And God help us the day it's taken away, because that's probably going to happen at some point. But until then, have a nice day.